What's up, guys? It's John here with Nothing But Cardboard, and today I am going to be going over the absolute things you must know when you are drafting in a keeper ESPN league. I'm going to try and make this as short as possible, so there's going to be a ton of information crammed into just a couple of minutes, but hang on because we're going to start with number one. All right, so step number one is know the rules. Now, I know this might sound obvious, but it is super important if you're going to have success in your draft. So things that you want to look for: is this a standard league? Is it a PPR league? Is it a half-point league? Obviously, this is going to affect how you draft and the keepers that you're going to select. Second thing you're going to want to look for is, what do the lineups look like? Is it a 3 wide receiver league? Are there 2 quarterbacks? Are there weird 2 flexes or whatever? You want to know this stuff before you draft, so you know to put maybe more weight on one position than another position. Also look at how many bench slots you're going to have, because that is going to determine how much depth you're going to have for later and how deep, and maybe you want to look up some breakout candidates that you're going to snipe later in the rounds. A very important thing is, how many keepers are we going to have in this league? Now, for this scenario, I'm going to assume that it's a 4-keeper league, so I'm going to select 4 players for the sake of this video. Is it a snake draft? Is it a standard draft? This is going to affect how you're going to keep your players, and I'll explain that a little bit later as part of the strategy. Very important to know. A couple other things: are there trade limits, waiver limits? Obviously, you don't want to go over on those and be screwed at the end of the year in the playoffs when you can't pick anyone up or trade for anybody. And then the other thing, can you trade before the draft? Sometimes you can help stack your lineup before the draft and before you have to select your keepers to just kind of pad your slots just a little bit more. So basically, you just need to know the rules. And in order to do that, what you need to do is open up your app. You'll go to the League tab, League Info, and then basically all of the rules are going to be right there as far as how you score points, where points will be awarded, and how points will be taken away. So make sure you run that over, make sure you know it up and down, and that's going to lead us to step number 2. So step number 2 is research the players. This is super, super, super important. I can't stress how important this is to do your homework on your players. Fantasy football is a game of statistics. So depending on how the player plays, that's how many points you're going to get. And it is a huge advantage to know where your player ranks among others so that you know how to pick. So the first thing you're going to want to do is obviously know if this is a standard, PPR, or half-point league. That is going to affect the rankings, and it's going to shift players up or down depending on if they catch the ball often, like if you're a running back, are you catching the ball out of the backfield, or are you just a ground pound kind of guy, just rusher, pure bell cow type player. So what you're going to want to do is get a pre-draft ranking website, whether it be ESPN or Fantasy Pros, whatever you prefer. Just make sure that you are checking those rankings and comparing them to other sites so that you can get a good idea of where your players and your opponent's players are going to rank on the scale. You're really going to want to focus on the top 40 in this scenario, since there are 4 keepers. Anything after that really is not going to matter too much, because they're not going to be kept. They're going to be dropped, and you might be able to select them later on in the rounds. But basically, you're going to want to make sure you check, and don't just check once and that's it. You need to continue to check up until the draft, because players get injured, things happen, rankings change. Just make sure you do your homework. All right, so step number 3 is scout the other teams. This is often overlooked, but it is super important in helping you to determine who you should keep, who you should let go, and maybe you only select 2 or 3 keepers, maybe not all 4. So what you're going to want to do is go team by team and look to see who their best players are. You're going to want to determine if they have 4 keepers, or potentially less than 4 or more than 4 keepers. So if they have less than 4 quality keepers, that means they're probably going to end up only keeping maybe 1 or 2 players, which means they are going to be drafting in the 3rd and 4th round. Maybe they have 5 or 6 keepers, which means they are going to have to dump 2 of those keepers, which means they are going to be available to draft in the 1st through 4th round. You're going to want to do that until you kind of have an idea of who is going to keep who's going to be drafting in the first 4 rounds. Now, the other thing you're going to want to keep in mind is what rookies are coming into the league. Obviously, rookies were not on a team in the prior year, which means they are going to be available for this draft. So for the 2021 season, a notable rookie would be a Najee Harris. Now, not necessarily going to go in the first 2 rounds, but it would be a super nice pickup in maybe the 3rd or the 4th round. This is an opportunity you're only going to have if you only keep 2 keepers or 1 keeper, whatever. But if you keep all 4 keepers, you're not going to draft until the 5th round, making a Najee Harris unobtainable by you. All right, so step number 4 is analyze your team. You just did it for the other teams. Now you're going to do it for your own team. So say you are in a 10-man league, meaning there's 9 other teams. You are going to want to make sure your players that you're potentially going to keep fall within the top 40. If they are outside of that range, they're probably not going to be worth keeping. Once you narrow it down to the top 40, you're going to want to see if you have any borderline players. And by borderline player, I mean like a Julio Jones, who is currently ranked around 37, 38, somewhere around there. Now, this kind of player may be worth keeping, maybe not be worth keeping, but you potentially could trade this player in some leagues, for example, for a draft pick. So say you have 5 keepers, including Julio Jones, meaning that you're going to end up having to drop Julio Jones. It is much better for you to trade Julio and get some sort of draft pick, whether it be a 7, 6, or 5th round pick, than get nothing at all. And this can be very helpful. It's a huge advantage to have 2 5th round picks than just 1, obviously. So if you're able to get something for nothing, absolutely do it. Second thing you're going to want to look at is maybe you're stacked in one position and you need some help in another position. So say you have 4 wide receivers and no running backs. That's a pretty dangerous spot to be in because running backs are hard to get after the first 4 rounds. You're going to want to try and put together a package deal, maybe have to send some draft picks, maybe some late draft picks to get yourself a top tier running back. Now, this is all obviously going to vary depending on what your team looks like, but these are just things to consider, and it's going to lead us into step number 5. Step 5 is select your keepers. This is where it starts to get interesting, and all of that strategy, all of that research is going to come into play. So it is worth noting, though, that regardless of the kind of league that you are in, rather if it is a standard draft or a snake draft, the first keeper rounds are going to act like a standard draft, meaning the person who drafts first is also going to draft 11th, 21st, and 31st. And then it won't actually get into that snake until the 5th round. So basically, if you were unlucky and got the 10th overall draft pick, that means you are going to select last in every single first round until the 5th round rather. Then you will be the first pick. Now that we know how the draft works, it is time to make the selections. So there is a lot of strategy and a lot of different variables that can go into this, but I'll just kind of cover what I do, and hopefully you'll be able to make your best decision. So I like to think, do I have a player who is worth my first overall draft pick, my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th? So for example, say I have a team, my best player is Keenan Allen. He's a great player, don't get me wrong, but he is not worth a first overall pick. So in this scenario, I have Keenan Allen, and then I have 3 other players that kind of fall in between 20th and 40th overall. My best move might actually be dumping all of them and hoping that another team had too many keepers and dropped someone who is actually better than Keenan Allen. Now, this is where knowing the other teams and how many keepers they're going to have and how many other people are going to be drafting in those rounds come into play, because maybe it's you and one other person that dropped everybody. That means it's just you and one other person who are going to be drafting for the first 4 rounds. Now you're going to want to know, do I draft before that person or after that person? Because say you have the 3rd overall pick, and that person has the 5th overall pick, you are going to continue to pick in front of them all 4 rounds. So say there is a stud rookie that you want to get, you can drop your entire team, pick up that stud rookie, and then your players are still available to be drafted throughout the entire draft for the first 4 rounds. That doesn't mean somebody else can't take them, but you'll also have a chance to get other teams' players who might have been better than your team to begin with. So there's a lot of different things that you can think about, a lot of different ways that you can think about this, but just try to think is there another player that I know is going to get dropped that is better than the players that I have now? Or maybe you're stacked. Maybe your team is just overflowing with talent and the decision is easy. Maybe you have 3 first-round, 3 running backs that would have all gone in the first and second round, and then you have a stud wide receiver. You're not going to have to drop anybody. You're going to keep those 4 top players as long as it works with your strategy and whatever kind of lineup you have. In that case, it's obvious, and you might be able to trade some of the players away and get draft picks. But these are just a couple examples of the things that you need to think about when you are selecting a keeper. All right, so that leads us to the last step, which is draft some studs. So hopefully you're able to follow all of those tips to set up your best strategy for success. The last tip that I am going to leave you with is to print out the latest pre-draft ranking. Make sure that you have it in front of you when you go to draft, because this is going to be critical to making sure you get the best possible value on the players. So what I like to do is have it in front of me, the entire list. As a player gets picked, or in this case, you might have some keepers, you're going to go ahead and cross them out as they go. This is going to help you keep track of who's left and where they rank as far as the overall value goes. And that is pretty much it, guys. You should be pretty well set up for success in this keeper league. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Like and subscribe to the channel, and I will make sure to put out more content like this. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.